go. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Friday News Lunch for the Bucks County Beacon. This is Kev Mahoney. Now, each week, I'm usually joined by the editor of the Bucks County Beacon, Cyril Michaleko. But this week, we got a treat for you. Joining me today will be one of our regular writers for the Bucks County Beacon, Pat LaMarche. Now, we'll hope you'll join us live every Friday at noon, right? You know, on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. No more X. See ya, little Hitler wannabe. Or right on the Bucks County Beacon's website at buckscountybeacon.com. Look, everybody, we're going to need independent, community-supported progressive media in the weeks, months, and years ahead. There could not be a better time to take a moment to head on over to buckscountybeacon.com, click on that Support the Beacon button, and become a supporter. You can become a monthly supporter for $1 a month, a little $1 a month. Become a regular supporter at $5 a month, yearly supporter for as little as $50 a year, or you can even drop a one-time donation to help keep the Beacon's critical lens focused and sustainable. Now look, there is no doubt that there is a lot that is going on. There has been a fire hose of news this week. All right, now just a little sampling. Trump's ICE agents have just arrested and deported hundreds of migrants in cities like New York and Boston. ICE agents raided a Newark, New Jersey seafood store without a warrant, indiscriminately arresting people who they thought might be undocumented. Several of the people arrested were U.S. citizens, including a U.S. military veteran. Trump pardoned anti-abortion activists who were convicted of blocking access to women's health clinics and intimidating staff and patients just in time for today's anti-abortion March for Life in D.C. Right? And hundreds of DEI workers in the federal government were immediately put on administrative leave this week. Now that even the private sector is freaking out, being thrown into chaos about what this is going to mean for them. That is also true in higher ed institutions and K-12 schools across the country. And add insult to injury, perhaps, and the National Institute of Health, Center for Disease Control, and the FDA and other agencies were ordered to stop all external communications and cancel planned meetings this week. Oh, good thing there's no outbreak of bird flu that's happening in our egg supply right now, right? Yeah. God forbid we should find a new virus that is going to start to spread through the population and everyone's got a muzzle on them. Well, I'll tell you, usually that's what we're going to do. We dig into all that stuff. But this week, yes, there's a lot going on. But this week, we wanted to turn to some excellent reporting from the Bucks County Beacon's own writers, Pat LaMarche. Now, Pat is a freelance journalist and author who lives in central Pennsylvania with her husband. Pat has written 9 books on poverty and homelessness. Now, I first met Pat years ago when she joined Rick Smith on a working class history tour with his family. That months-long RV trip was the basis of Pat's book, Daddy, What's the Middle Class? Rick Smith's journey to teach his kids that none of us learned in school. None of us learned in school. Pat's recent articles for the Bucks County Beacon include Pennsylvania's finally passed an LGBTQ plus panic defense, or Chester County's homelessness numbers improved thanks to renewed commitment to affordable housing and rental assistance, or homelessness in Bucks County rose 25% in 2024, exceeding alarming nationwide trend. Pat, I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome to the show.
No, thank you for having me. And it's nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's so great. I mean, I remember, because I was working really closely with Rick back in those days, and I remember him his all the prep for the tour, the excitement about that. I had a box of books that I was distributing it out. I still had a few. I was going through and reorganizing stuff in our basement, and I still had about 5 books left. And so I went out, put them in the little libraries around town.
Great.
It was such a great project.
Yeah, that was we got to meet some of the Memphis sanitation workers who, of course, Martin Luther King Jr. was down there marching with them when he was killed on the terrace of the Lorraine Motel. We touched history all around the country, and I got to travel with his family. I slept on the table. We folded the RV table down. I slept on the table. The kids slept all together in one bed in the back of the RV, and Rick and Carol were up in the thing that's over the cab that you drive. It was just insanity. Yeah, and we broadcast every evening, 3 hours a night driving.
Yep. It was something. It was like one of the most impressive and kind of like I don't know, like once in this lifetime,
Mm,
like experience, you know, and I hate to say, you know, back in like more hopeful times in some way, when you're looking
yeah.
at building knowledge of working class families and that history, kind of into that. I mean, it was one of the dreams that Rick had for years. So,
You know, a lot of people ask me when I titled it Daddy, What's the Middle Class? Because, you know, he had his kids with him and he was teaching them all these things. They asked me if it was what is or what was,
that's a good
you know,
question.
because it's what's. And I
Yeah.
said, I guess that's up to us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's true now
Mm,
more than ever. I mean,
yeah.
like 10 plus years out from that, and look where we're at. And I should take this as a moment to kind of once again, send out best wishes to Carol.
Mm,
As you know, we've talked about this on the show. Carol was in an awful motorcycle accident. She was kind of hit by a driver, and she's making progress. She's just had another successful kind of visit to the hospital. Rick, Carol, and the whole family, like our hearts go out with you. We're always thinking about you, and kind of, you know, we're pulling for you, Carol. Carol Strong.
yeah, wonderful woman. She's just one of the strongest human beings I ever met. And she was the editor on the book. So that was pretty fun.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, here we are. So, kind of little reunion of sorts for everybody. So, looking for that. So, you know, Pat. So now for those folks, I mean, I know like people who are listening to the show, a lot of folks are going to be familiar with the work that you've been doing for the Beacon. But could you kind of take us back a little bit and kind of let us know a little bit about kind of your background and kind of what got you to the point that you were going to be decided, you know, to be a journalist to cover this work?
Well, in the last century, I was a journalist. I started out in television in 1988 or 89. So a long time ago. And I started in TV, and I always joke that I turned 35, put on 20 pounds, and went straight to radio. So I did radio for about 10 more years. I actually did a brief stint back in radio in the early 20 teens. I worked for Stephen King has a bunch of radio stations up north, and I was a morning show on a political talk show for him for a few years. And then most famously, recently, he closed those radio stations down, and I was in the New York Times. I was like, "Oh, that's nice." They dredged somebody out of the old pictures. So I've been a journalist, and then about 10 years after I went into radio, I went into print, which is much harder than any of the other two.
Yeah.
The nice thing about writing for broadcast is everything has to be tight, short, quick. If you get a great soundbite, usually the person's either live with you or you taped it and you just play it. When I interview people now, I have to. Luckily now there's so much incredible recording to transcript software out there.
No kidding.
Yeah, that's made it a lot easier. But you know, it's still tough to get interviews for print. I'm really excited by people still reading print. That's all I do now, since I don't know whose idea it was to have an election on Guy Fawkes Day, but I would really like to have a conversation with that person. But since Guy Fawkes Day, November 5th, I have not watched the news. I am so frustrated with it being interpreted for me. I still read the news more than is probably healthy. And obviously I write the news down, record it the best I can. I think reporters are professional witnesses. And if you're a good reporter, then you tell people what you witnessed, and you don't make anything up, and you don't change anything. You know, you just deliver it to the public, and then they can make their decisions. I think there's some really courageous journalists out there.
Yes.
And I'm grateful. But yeah, so then I ended up one of my iterations. I spent one of those trips around the country. I've done a lot of them. I stayed in homeless shelters all over the country, and I wrote a book about the people I met in those shelters. It was called Left Out in America. And a minister in central Pennsylvania read my book and offered me a job down here to work in a shelter. Mm-hmm. So I ended up, for the better part of a decade, still writing, but managing shelters. I was operations manager of the largest emergency shelter in Cumberland County, and I was vice president of the largest transitional shelter. So homelessness and poverty have always been sort of my interest. And when Cyril called me a couple of years ago and asked if I would like to write, he allowed me to focus on poverty on a lot of my stories, and I've been very appreciative of that. But since then, I've written 15 years after Left Out in America came out, Still Left Out in America came out, which was by then I'd spent 10 years in shelters working with the federal government. I traveled a great deal as a journalist going to disasters. I was at Katrina. I was at Magalia and Paradise for the Camp Fire, not for the Camp Fire, but in the aftermath, where 28,000 people became homeless in 80 minutes. So and of course, Los Angeles now, we see this again. So I've had the opportunity to work with FEMA, HUD, Health and Human Services, the Veterans Administration, and the U.S. Department of Education. All 5 agencies deal with homelessness in one way or another. And, they don't integrate well. They don't play nicely with each other. But it's given me a real opportunity, to have a broad background when I write my stories on poverty and homelessness that I don't have. I mean, some stories I'm assigned, I'm like, oh my God, I have to learn everything right now.
Right.
Which is always a challenge.
Well, I think, the focus, I mean, I've absolutely loved your stories that have been focusing on poverty and homeless and kind of the region too, as well. It's like, I remember, God, back in the 80s when I was like early 80s when I was still in high school and stuff, that there was this, uptick of homelessness, and there was this uptick where, a lot of folks were forced out of shelters, that were forced out of institutions, mental health institutions, as the Reagan administration shut them down. That was kind of like out there in the news, like about that. And I remember then, and it's got to be true now, is that getting people just to pay attention to that in any kind of sustained way. I mean, it seems like our culture has so much been about just, we want to ignore, right, those people that are left out.
Well, I think part of it is, am I an accomplice? Have I worked towards this outcome? I think we see that in a lot of people's motivation when they make decisions, their own, even if they don't recognize the guilt they feel. But then the other thing is, if I don't think that person deserves it, and this happens to people who don't deserve it, well, it could happen to me. I don't deserve it. So believing people deserve it's an important thing of self-care. Believing those people want to live outside, that's part of self-care. I love the snow. I'm from Maine. I love the snow. It just, every time it snows, I just want to play in it.
I'm with you.
And I want to end homelessness so I can enjoy the snow. Because the minute I see snowfall or ice hit the pane of glass and make that pretty tinkling noise, I think about people living in it.
Yeah.
And it breaks my heart. And we've damped down our empathy so that we don't either feel like accomplices or feel vulnerable to the same condition. I think that's what people do.
Yeah, I think that's right. You had this piece. I mean, I didn't highlight this in the intro, but you had this piece. I want to say it came out around Thanksgiving, about how, like, was it Homeless Awareness Week or Month has failed, or something like this. I remember reading that. I'm like, yeah, like this whole idea that we're going to have like this dedicated time, which we're supposed to pay attention around a time which is supposed to be about celebrating food and family and togetherness. It's just kind of not breaking through.
Well, I think everything that gets its own month, we should realize deserves to be talked about every day, right? Like, what is this with Black History Month? Black history is history. That should be absolutely every day, right?
Yeah.
And Homeless Awareness Month or Food Insecurity Awareness Month. Wait a minute. And that is something when I'm such a buzzkill when I go out and speak about poverty and homelessness. People are like, she was so sad. One of the things I tell people to do is pick a day and pretend it's Christmas. I like to use my mother's birthday because my mother was so wonderful to me and I like to celebrate her. But when you're in the housing and homelessness business, everybody cares at Thanksgiving and Christmas. In March, someone's still burned out of their house. March, there's still a kid whose parent lost their job. March, there's still a reason to care, but people don't think about it or don't acknowledge it or don't say, oh, this is what I. So if you pick March 18th as your holiday that you're going to help somebody that isn't you, then maybe we can make this go all year long, and it's a way you can do something. The other thing you can do is contact your local homeless liaison, which is the federally mandated, for now, federally mandated job that every school district has to have a homeless liaison. And those are the people who know who the kids are in the school district that are experiencing homelessness. And they won't tell you who the kids are, but you can say, hey, if somebody needs a pair of shoes, call me. And you'll never meet that kid, but you'll change their lives. So that's another thing you can do. Just your local school district, call them up and say, hey, if they call 1 month and you can't afford to help, fine, no harm, no foul, but you made yourself available. Or maybe your whole office at work will chip in $10 each and get that kid the thing they need. But, there are things you can do to make a difference.
That's awesome. I mean, I didn't realize that was mandated in every district. Like, I know that we get contacted every once in a while. So notice will come out from our school about this, but that's okay. Cause I think one of the things that people that work around issues of homelessness have always done is like a both and move. It's like, on the one hand, giving this turkey at Thanksgiving is not going to solve homelessness, but it is something that I can do. Right. At the same time, the reasons why there's homelessness are systemic and deep in our culture. So we can do both, right? Fighting for legislation, a change in the way that our economy works, all these kinds of stuff. But in our backyards, right, we can do concrete things. Like, I always remember the, amazing work done by, mutual aid organizations. Like, I was involved, like, for years. Like, we had our little punk rock crew, like, in high school and college, that worked with Food Not Bombs, setting up tables until like a lot of those were even banned from public parks. Like, you were not allowed to give out food anymore. Yeah. It was crazy.
I was in Knoxville, Tennessee, on one of my homeless tours. And the guy who was running the Food Not Bombs down there, I had to wait for him to get out of jail so I could interview him. He was, it was only about 2 days. So I just changed my plans so that he would get out of jail before I got there. But yeah, I mean, and Gainesville, Florida, very famous for, having a mission that allows you to feed 123 people, but not 124.
Just incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. Like, it just reminds me of what we see from the Trump administration about, the whole idea, like we saw this during COVID, like, well, if we just stop testing, right, then we wouldn't have as high numbers. And it's like, well, okay, if we cut off feeding people at 120, then that's all there are. Right.
Right.
It's insane.
I do think, he learned a lot in his last, just to pick on Trump for a minute, just because I can't stop myself.
Exactly what I wanted to ask you about next. So.
But I do think he learned a lot the last time.
100%.
And one of the things he learned was, don't tell people things. And I think he always knew that. Like, he didn't tell a lot of people about Stephanie Clifford right away. He didn't run home. Maybe he told a few people, hey, guess who I had in my room tonight? It was Stormy Daniels, right? But he knew not to tell some things, but then he, let his mouth fly about on the bus with, grabbing people.
Yep.
So he does blab things. So I think he's kind of learned that if he tells people about a pandemic, he might have to address it. And, I'm genuinely concerned for everybody's kids. But things like whether or not there's a salmonella outbreak, that's just very important information. Yeah. And it happens all the time because we're only human. And maybe it'll stop happening because we won't have anyone to harvest the crops. So they won't get infected because there'll be no people.
Right.
But maybe that's his shrewd idea. You'll have to pick your own tomato.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we could just run through this litany of things that have happened this week, and I'm curious, of kind of your take, and I think I said this to you out of the show, both as kind of, on the one hand, like as a journalist, on the other hand, as just a human being, right? I mean, when we get a fire hose of like news like this that is so damaging to so many people all at once. Right. You see some folks trying to try to kind of stamp out every fire individually, like here, and kind of like there's no focus, right? Or there's this kind of weird kind of normalization of the whole situation where, people are reporting on it like, well, this is kind of going to cause the Trump administration problems, like as if they care about what
Yeah.
people think. So I'm
Yeah.
just curious, like, those two kind of hats, one, the human being hat, how do you like think about this week, but also then as a journalist looking to kind of cover this and finding meaningful like stories and participation in this kind of context. I mean, how do you think about this past week?
I saw a great cartoon this week, and there have been so many. I mean, it's just this fire hose, as you said, has just been fodder for creative people, which is always the only upside, I suppose. But it was, I said I could kill someone on Fifth Avenue, and I did. And the corpse on the ground was Lady Liberty.
Mm.
And
There you go.
it was like he didn't specify, but now we see exactly who's the target is the entire justice system, every kind of liberty that we have. So I think that's the one overarching thing is I do think there are going to be too many plates to keep spinning for us to solve the problems
Right.
that they're making. If we don't all work together or if we don't all work separately even. But the other thing that I'm, as a journalist, and a question I've asked a lot this week, because I've been working on two big features this week, was in the Pennsylvania legislature, what I've sensed in the last 2 years writing for the Bucks County Beacon is that the Republicans in the Pennsylvania General Assembly have felt, I don't know if it's a little more empowered because I haven't really watched politics as closely. I've been in Pennsylvania about 15 years, but I haven't watched it the way I have the last two. But it seems they have been saying, basically, I have my job because I am a little moderate. If I got too extreme in Pennsylvania, other than some parts of Pennsylvania, I would lose my job. Certainly Bucks County, right? And they have voted accordingly. Several of the pieces of gun legislation in the last session were voted for by Bucks County Republicans, not just the Bucks County Democrats. And that's a big deal when you've got people saying, well, I represent all the people in my district. I don't just represent the Republicans. I represent the Democrats, the independents, the children who aren't allowed to vote at all. I've got to represent everybody. So yeah, I'm going to vote with the slim majority this time, get this out of the legislature or out of the House of Representatives. But what I fear from having this muscle flexing, I mean, the pictures he makes of himself as Joe Atlas or whatever kind of look. That's what he envisions himself as. And, and quite frankly, he does bully everybody else in the sandbox, right? And I'm afraid, or not afraid, but maybe I am afraid. I don't know. But I sense a potential for the Republicans that have been thinking rationally and fairly on behalf of their constituents to say, I need to sound like him. I need to be like him. Even if it's not what my constituents want, I'm not gonna talk back to him. I'm not gonna get primaried out. I'm not gonna get a bullseye because I acted in a rational fashion.
Yep.
My upcoming story is about gun violence. And they just closed the Office of Gun Violence Prevention in Washington. How is that going to make those Republicans who have voted for sensible gun regulation in the past, how's that going to make them feel? Obviously, they'll be going directly against. That's what I think's the potential for real harm in Pennsylvania.
Well, I think, I remember like my daughter used to play soccer. She played travel soccer and things like this. And one of the parents of the other girls on the team had worked with the Bucks County Republican Party, right? Was in, kind of their leadership area. I don't want to kind of out him at this point, but and I remember sitting there, we'd have good conversations, right? We have good conversations on the side. We both knew we were interested in politics and things like this, but we had like regular conversation, disagreed over things, but you disagree in the way that parents with kids playing soccer do, right? And they were like, decent people. But I remember one time it was after probably the year after Trump was elected the first time. He said to me, I don't know what's happening. We're losing, he said, I've never seen it like this before. Like, we've always been these people in our district, but we're going to lose the party. And I don't think he said, this is not exact quote, but said something along, I don't think the people who are running the party now have the stomach to push back. I worry that they're going to go along.
Yeah.
And that's what they did.
Yeah.
There was this moment where people who had been invested in that party in the county were really thinking about, we need to stop these people before they're out of hand. And instead, what they did is they just opened the floodgates.
Yeah.
They said, nope, we're going to go with the flow because it's easier to do, because that's where the money is, right? And that's where the attention is right now.
And it's power, and Machiavelli.
Yep,
that
100%.
power is so it's so tempting to want more. There was a lawmaker, in Maine that I really admired, and he was a state rep and then a state senator, and he always voted against expanding health care. Always. Never voted for it. And also always refused the state health care for himself. So that's the kind of Republican I remember. I have known and loved and admired so many members of the Republican Party, people who were good and fair and decent and honorable, but had a different idea of how we would get to be the better country that we needed to be. Never doubted that we needed to be a better country at all times, but we had different ideas on how that was going to work. Yeah. These were people who were honorable, and I don't see that honorable thing. I also don't see compassion. The bishop who,
Washington D.C.
spanked the president to his face without batting an eye, without her voice wavering. Her courage was so powerful, it looked like she didn't have any. Right? She was just talking, and being kind. But when she said all that
being
stuff,
kind.
And being kind. But when she was saying those things, she was saying, where's your humanity? Where's your humanity? When you pick on a trans kid in high school as a powerful member of the Pennsylvania legislature, what in God's name are you thinking?
Yep.
And I ask that question as an atheist. What are you thinking when you pick on a 15-year-old kid who's already getting picked on by their peers? And then you want to pile on when your job is to protect them? Yep. When that kid shot at the president, I did not see a single person voice sorrow for that child. That child was handed a gun by his father.
Yep.
And he left his home, and he never came home. You can say the person did the wrong thing, and you can say the person should be arrested. And you can, if you are a person who thinks he should have been shot, you still can feel sorry for the kid.
Yeah.
For being on that roof. I just don't get where the compassion and kindness
for all that led to that, to get to that point, right? And the cycle of that pattern, the way it's in our discourse and which is in our media, as people seeing that, especially young kids, especially young white men, seeing that as a pathway to deal with a whole range of kind of like complicated histories and issues that they're dealing with. 100%.
Right.
And that's not, as you said, that's not to say like, oh, therefore it's all is excused. That's not the point. It's never the point.
No, right? There's the tragedy of that child's life. And what was his life for the first 15 years like?
Right.
I don't even want to think about it.
Exactly. Well, and I think about, I think about exactly these questions is how I read your recent piece there too, as well, about will Pennsylvania finally ban LGBTQ panic defense, where, I mean, in a sense, like Schlossberg and Sanchez and Sanchez, the co-sponsors of the bill to try to kind of do this, were essentially raising that as a central issue, saying that both sides of what you just said is like, this can be just a common sense, rational thing to do about fairness, right? And it also can show compassion for people that, are somehow excluded from what most folks just expect is just true. And I have to say, I did not know until I read your piece, and I'm ashamed to even admit this, that I did not know that Pennsylvania was a state that allowed people to say, "Oh, I killed that gay person, I killed that trans person because they told me they were trans or they told me they were gay, and I freaked out, so I killed them," and that's a defense.
I killed that person, whether or not they were gay or trans or whatever, because I thought.
Because I thought.
Yes. It doesn't even have to be true to use the gay panic defense. I didn't know that either. And I was, I always joke that if Ben Franklin came back, he'd move to New Jersey, because Pennsylvania's really got to get its acting gear. I mean, this is outlawed. Gay panic defense is outlawed. New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, and lots of Virginia is quite conservative.
Yeah.
Right? Quite conservative. But they have managed to outlaw it all around us, except the little anomaly of Ohio and West Virginia. And yet we still allow it. And you know what? Outlawing it, have nobody even try to use it because nobody's killing gay or trans people. That would be the best thing, or beating them up, or slapping them silly, or shoving them off the bus. I mean, you can have violence against a person you suspect of identifying sexually different from you and get away with it because you said they spooked me. And it is a diminished capacity defense. Like, I was temporarily insane.
Yeah, but it's kind of like it's the hetero white male snowflake violence vengeance defense. It's like my because I mean, let's be frank. I mean, that's who really you're talking about. Is like, for the most part, you're talking about like heterosexual men carrying out acts, mostly white, carrying out acts of violence against people that they perceive to be non-heteronormative, right? Because they think it. And I kept on thinking, like, holy shit, this is like the, like the castle doctrine, where people can kind of like, oh, well, I thought that person, we saw that, like, at the beginnings, like, of, or like, the movement against police violence against black kids, when we saw like Trayvon Martin murdered, like the whole idea is like, oh, I thought this person might be a criminal, so therefore I was allowed to kill them. Or like the qualified immunity that police officers are allowed to kind of are allowed to say is like, oh, I killed them because I was afraid. Regardless if they were an actual threat, even had the potential threat, but they could defend, and they're told to use that defense. I mean, I was floored reading. Well,
I did a story recently too about Tyree, who was released from prison after 27 years for Tyree Wallace for he was not there. He didn't do it. The man who murdered he was in prison for murder. The man who murdered the shop owner that was killed said he wasn't with him. But the prosecutor was later fired in this big clean out of bad prosecutors in Philadelphia that happened a decade or two ago. And prosecutors have immunity too. Like that prosecutor who used basically coerced evidence to put an innocent man in prison, that they could fire him if they didn't like their work product, but they couldn't go after him for lying about an innocent human being. And our justice system, what I learned doing that story, which it was Christmas Eve. I drove to Philly because I live in the central Pennsylvania area. I drove to Philly. I spent 2.5 hours with this man. He gave me on with his attorneys on the holiday. And he's lost 27 years of his life. And there's no penalty for the people who willfully took those years away from him.
I mean,
it's a modern slavery, because you can sell one, usually black man, into prison to get your own freedom. So the the guy who said he was there wasn't there because the guy who said that was in prison at the time. He was in custody, confessing to his own crimes. He said that Tyree was there to get a 60-year sentence knocked down to 5. So he bought his freedom with Tyree's incarceration.
It's incredible. And it's to see we're at a point now, and again, in your piece where both Schlossberg and Sanchez are saying, like, look, normally we wouldn't have to touch this, right? Because this would just be common sense. You don't get to say that because your like foo-foos were hurt, that therefore that gave you the right to kill somebody. And yet there's a recognition that, okay, we tried to pass a whole range of bills that were about protecting LGBTQ plus folks, right? And the Republican, either through like whatever, like procedural shenanigans or outright resistance, were they couldn't get those bills passed, right? Even among, and they even say, like, there are some Republicans who seem to be open to this stuff. This totally makes sense to protect everyone equally, and yet where do they end up? But here they're feeling, no, we wouldn't normally have to do this, but we feel we have to now, given the tenor of what's going on. And this should be a no-brainer for any of these, like, so-called like centrist Republicans, is saying, no, look, you can't do this for any other group. Why on earth would you allow this as a defense when it comes to kind of, say, killing someone who is perceived as potential to be LGBTQ plus?
Who else we really persecuted enormously unfairly in the similar way is when women kill their abusers.
Yeah.
We don't let them get away with that. Women kill their abusers, they go to prison. Depending on your state, you just vote when you were still on probation, you go to prison.
Right. And that's even when there's cause, right?
Yeah.
That's
even that one woman who was put in prison and he was gonna kill her.
Yep.
Right. So these guys definitely are capable of passing laws that say tough luck. You were like you said, you were a little foo-foo wounded. You can't kill somebody for that. Yeah. He had his hands around your throat. You still can't kill somebody for that. That's what they say about a woman who's being, a victim in those circumstances, or anyone who's a victim of intimate partner violence, right?
It's something. Well,
yeah, it's a real honor. I got to say, it's a real honor to write for the Bucks County Beacon, because I've written for some good places. Bangor Daily News is another great daily newspaper that I wrote for years and years. But the Bucks County Beacon allows real people's stories to be heard. And they allow real lawmakers, people who have a real reason for getting up and going to work in the State House every day. They allow their stories to be told. And it's such an honor. And I have a huge amount of respect for Representative Perry Warren. And I interviewed him this week. And I asked him, give me some background on Perry Warren. Why are you the champion of gun violence? And he spoke about being a dad of 5 kids, living walking distance from the elementary school, going to turn on the news and hearing that 20 children and 6 teachers were murdered at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. And the devastation that did to his soul because he had a child who died. Representative Warren lost his own child. It wasn't to gun violence. It was to an accident. But he feels the pain of those parents and those families. Yeah. And that is what makes, getting to interview a human being that works their own pain into caring about someone else.
Right there.
That's why I love my job. It's wonderful.
Well, I tell you, this is the same thing, because I was so glad to see Mike Schlossberg, right? You interviewing him there, because I've known Mike for, not like friends, but through years of kind of being involved with this work. I remember we were on a couple panels when we used to have the PA Progressive Summit out in Harrisburg, And here's a guy whose own kind of struggles with, say, mental health struggles and kind of histories and stuff like that. He has been open with that and has turned that into part of his mission for being.
Mm.
Right. And he actually talks with his constituents and listens and feels it. And, it's like he and I might not agree on every policy choice all along the way, but I'll got that guy's back any day of the week.
Exactly.
You know what I
Exactly.
mean? I mean,
Yeah.
because that's what we want in legislators. And, I got to think about, at the end of that piece where it just seems to be like, you got some people that are there for those reasons. They're trying to do something, and other people are just playing team sports,
Yeah.
right? It's just
Yeah.
like they're like, this is a job, and I'm on this team, and I want my team to win.
Yeah.
And they're divorced from any sense of empathy, of care about the impact of what they're doing on actual people. They're only concerned about kind of like this, I don't like feedback loop of keeping themselves in positions of power. I mean, I don't know how else to look at it.
Yeah, I am always stunned by this distorted reality that they employ also. Representative Barb Gleim, I went over to the State House to work, and I walked by Representative Barb Gleim, who's Central PA, and she was with, I don't know, maybe 12, 20 people who were reading the Bible out loud, taking turns.
Oh yeah.
Right? That's fine. That's your faith.
Yep.
It's the front steps. It's a public place. First
Yep.
Amendment. If that brings you joy and comfort, I am 100% behind you. I will defend your right to do that. But when she promoted it on her site and when she publicized that she had done it, none of the other people were in the picture. She was standing alone at the podium, and she had the Bible and her and the podium, and she was standing alone for the Bible. And these 20 people, support people that were under a tent behind her, around her, they must have had to move so she could get this picture of herself alone. It's like, if I had a whole pile of people who felt the way I do and shared my joy, I'd put them in the picture.
Exactly. It's like the we, not me, right? I mean,
yeah. And then she goes home and picks on a trans kid at Cumberland Valley High School, right?
Yeah.
She goes home and says that kid can't play sports. It's like, where does this come from?
Yeah.
Where do you find the power to keep moving forward with that sort of malarkey?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you got to do it. And I do have to say, I mean, I wonder if, well, not even wonder. I think this is part of if I had to talk about my article of faith in doing this work of like independent media, it's that when you're able to shine a light on people who are doing work in your community, and spaces where kind of what you were saying there, to actual real people being able to kind of given a space to tell their story and talk about their work. That's, I guess it's one of these things that I think about as is one of the things we need to strengthen the fabric of our democracy, right? Of our communities, is for actual people to have the mic, so to speak, right? To be bringing that forward and having their stories told. Because otherwise, it could lead to a lot of despair and cynicism by folks saying like, well, nothing's going on. But on the other hand, it's like, I do believe that's how integral that is, or how important that is for people who are doing this work to be able to see like, yep, okay, my voice is kind of getting out there and we're representing that. And places like, again, this is why I was so proud to do, join what the Beacon is doing, because that's what we need. I mean, I think especially at a time like this, to building these things from the ground up.
Yeah. I've been I have several contacts in the Latino and migrant work organizations around. And I've been trying to talk to all of them, hopefully for a story in February about how this is impacting Pennsylvanians and people in Bucks County, especially. And they're too busy to talk to me.
Yeah.
And they're just so busy right now. And you think, oh my gosh, you know what they really need? They need 10 more sets of hands.
Yep.
They need 20 more sets of hands. The people doing the work are also the people who are running the office and doing, and like, they're just so busy. And everyone you speak to. I mean, especially since I was really fortunate that the Bucks County Beacon applied for me to have a press pass to the Supreme Court
Yep.
when Johnson versus Grants Pass happened last spring. And I got to sit in the Supreme Court and watch some of the stupidest questions I'd ever heard asked in my lifetime. I kid you not. It was breathtaking to hear Justice Alito say he doesn't know why people just can't walk away, because he used to live in New Jersey and he could walk from one municipality to another one in 20 minutes. And I'm sitting there in this press corps, so they keep us all in a little herd.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, with everything you own on your back, you walk from one municipality to another? I don't think so. And then I got to interview people from the people that were being persecuted in Grants Pass. They work there. They're supposed to walk to another municipality so they can fall asleep and then come back, because it's not being homeless that they're getting arrested for. It's falling asleep while homeless.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I'll tell you, it was quite an amazing thing, because Ketanji Brown Jackson was brilliant.
Yeah. She's something.
Amy Coney Barrett, not to get too far into the weeds, but it was class action for several people experiencing homelessness in Grants Pass. And there were several aspects of the law that were brought before the Ninth Circuit and then were going before the Supreme Court. One of them was a woman had been arrested, incarcerated for being home. By the way, that's expensive. It's a lot more expensive than just getting her a hotel room.
Yeah.
And between the Ninth District decision and the Supreme Court, that woman died, as people with chronic homelessness tend to do early. And so that part of the lawsuit was dropped. So Amy Coney Barrett was going on and on and on about this lawsuit in this woman and this aspect of it. And finally, I think it was Justice Elena Kagan said, that's been dropped. We're not hearing that today. Wow. Yeah. Do your homework, right? So, but I had the opportunity to do that. And now, since that happened, when I interview attorneys that are arguing these arguments, similar to what's going on this week in the migrant workforce problem, the attorneys that represent people experiencing homelessness, they're too busy to talk to you. It's like part of the problem is this ball that's been set into motion has gotten the worker bees so busy that there just isn't.
Right.
They all need help. If every one of us started worrying about the guy that did the dishes at the local restaurant we love to eat at, he would not get deported. By the way, as they proved in New Jersey, it doesn't matter whether he deserves to be deported or not. Right. They'll just go in.
Well, they went that seafood store. I just couldn't. That story was something else. I mean, they walked in unannounced, like no warrants or anything like this. And if somebody could not produce proof of citizenship right then and there, they were taken away. And that's why there was all these people who they're like, who carries their passport around with them, right? I mean, if you didn't have your driver's license with you, right, or your real ID or something like this,
it would have to be a real ID, right? Because a driver's license doesn't
count anymore, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's who they arrested. Like, they went indiscriminately, and again, I totally feel for the owner, for the manager. I think when they interviewed in one of the stories, where they're trying to be really careful because they're worried that there's going to be repercussions for them, but they're saying, as far as I could tell, all they were doing is looking around for who they thought might be undocumented and grabbed them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I mean. Look, anybody who's listening to this show, they know we've been talking about this for months, years, however you want, about this is exactly what we expect to see in these consequences. There was that one book, I'm forgetting the guy's name, but it's what is it? Not the brutality, the brutality is the point, or something like this.
Yeah, the cruelty.
The cruelty is the point.
And it really is the point.
And that is really what's going on. I mean, there's no other way of explaining that. And you think about what even the idea of communicating there's no safe space. In that interview of I think it was the store manager or somebody else who was there, they said that even some of the cops or the ICE agents that came in were Puerto Rican, right? So imagine that situation, right? When what does that communicate to you as that worker in that place? Is like there's no one who's safe,
Yeah.
right? It's like you can't even count on people in your community, right, for that.
And I went to graduate school in the Netherlands when I was in my late 30s. I was a disc jockey, right, doing radio news and radio
Nice.
broadcasting, and I thought, well, I got to get a real job. So I went to grad school and took my two kids. I was a single mom. We went to live in Europe for a year, and I went to grad school. So I lived in just outside Amsterdam. And every time I had a visitor, which of course, when you live in Europe, everyone visits you, I would go at least once a month to the Anne Frank house, right? Anne Frank was sold for 60 guilders, which was at the time about 30 US dollars, which in the 1930s and 40s was a fair amount of money, but not that much money, not to sell an entire family into a concentration camp.
Mhm.
And they were sold by their neighbors.
Yep.
And so I laughed when you said that I'm like the doctor on The Simpsons. I laugh at incredibly inappropriate moments.
It's my whole family.
Yeah. To take one person cause this horizontal hostility, right? Where you are so desperate to provide your own status quo that you turn the other guy in, that you make the other guy's life hell, that you while the dogs are feasting on him, I'll get one more day, right?
Yeah.
And we have to be really careful not to succumb to that horizontal hostility, right? It's how they win. it's how they break our spirit. And I can't imagine the only thing worse than being sold out is being sold out by your neighbor.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. And this goes right back to like how critical community building is. I mean, I think part of what enables that kind of situation is also when you have a breakdown of community bonds that, you know, um, again, I don't want to get off on a whole sidetrack here of kind of like, what social media has done to us or things like this, or like one of the additional consequences of COVID and kind of being kind of isolated. But this has been a process because it's been going on for decades and decades about the slow kind of isolation, Bowling Alone. I remember that book from kind of back in the day, kind of talking about how these breakdowns of say, community bonds where, I tell my students stories about a guy who used to live across the street from me, right? Who was a kind of like, staunch kind of conservative Republican and stuff. And he and I, we used to get out, we used to talk all the time. I love this guy, right? He was like he was hilarious, right? He's like just like a hilarious guy. And we would argue about things, but it was like arguing in what I always felt like what you're supposed to do in a democracy, right? You're kind of
Yeah.
exchanging ideas, you're talking about stuff, you think about things, right? But what mattered was that point of connection to be able to have that. And I remember hearing from his wife at one point, like initially when we first started talking and things, she was so concerned that we were going to get into a fight. Right. And then when found out that Ron, the guy's name was, would come back in and be like, oh, that guy's great. That was like, wait a minute. It doesn't have to be this disagreement is, community doesn't mean everybody gets along and it's a kumbaya moment, right? Community means is that those bonds of what it means to be there for kind of each other and securing a space and developing kind of relationships is important. When we cut ourselves off from that, it's so much easier to look at the neighbor that I don't know who they are, but I've looked them out my window multiple times and they don't look like me, so therefore I can sell them out. I mean, that's just something.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. And it's such an easy throwaway thing to do that in that Chester County story where Chester County had lowered its homelessness numbers by the federal government said like 50%, some crazy huge amount, 52% or something.
That's huge. It's huge.
It's huge. It's enormous. And they did a beautiful job, but they only lowered it by like 29%. Because what happened was the VA, which is another federal agency, not talking to HUD, both deal with homelessness. The VA had closed 2 veterans projects in Chester County, and they moved 141 homeless beds out of the county. So they went to Virginia and they went to Philadelphia. So 141 of those missing homeless people were just moved to another county, right? So the numbers were wrong, but nobody bothered to check it.
Wow.
Then the other thing they did that was really got me quite worked up when I was writing the story was they said that Chester County lowered its numbers by getting a handle on the migrant homelessness.
I saw that. Yeah.
There isn't migrant homelessness in Chester County. In fact, the only county that has it's got one of the lowest numbers of migrant workers at all in Pennsylvania, let alone the country. It's the wealthiest county in Pennsylvania. The only county that has anywhere really any agricultural workers is the mushroom capital there. Yep. And there were two people experiencing homelessness there. But the thing that they said when they just threw that sentence away, that they had addressed. So I called HUD, remarkably got somebody on the phone, right? And they said, well, that's New York and Chicago. I said, no, it's not. Let me read you your press release. You said Chester County, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. So then she said that she had to get back to me, in which case I got something I could put in writing, which is what I used. Mm-hmm. And it said, information used for our press releases comes from the agency in the area. So I went back to the agency in the area, and they never told them that. They don't keep numbers of migrant status.
That's crazy.
For obvious reasons. Why would you ask that question? Because no one who's anywhere near in trouble will come forward. It was just a mess. It was just a cluster mess. And the fact that those are now the people that sort of confusion, let's say it's just innocent confusion, is now in the hands of Doge. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, and again, Doge and these agencies, the head of the agencies, and this is like what you said, kind of early on today. Is Trump and the administration has learned a lot from them, and I think that I've said this probably 1,001 times to people when they say, well, again, there's going to be chaos once again. I said, look, they learned. I said, when I mean they, I'm not talking about Trump. Trump is going to always be Trump. I'm talking about the right-wing organizations, think tanks, and institutes that develop policy. When Trump got elected the first time, they were not on board with the Trump train. They thought, like, this guy, no, he says too many things that, so they backed off. And it wasn't until it was well into his administration that they realized that they could have influence over this guy, that all he wanted was money and people that were going to be loyal to him. That was it. Yeah. And so that's where Project 2025 came from, right? I mean, the whole idea is like, we need to prep for this now. And we are going to get all our ducks in a row, because we got the guy who will sign his big name on things with a Sharpie, right? And that's what he wants. He wants to be able to show people that he's signing his name on all this stuff, right? Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
And now, and so they have people placed in all these agencies that are actively working to dismantle them and to hurt people. And, people are like, anyone who's surprised that, like, oh my God, he moves so quickly. I'm like, where the hell have you been?
Yeah.
I mean, and this is all more concern. I mean, the other and this is also why I appreciate, the writing and the work that you're doing on homelessness and poverty and things like this, because we all know that while they're talking DEI and they're talking about migrants, really what this is, I mean, this is a class assault, right, on people that are most vulnerable right across the board. And, the fact that, you had this recent article too, as well. Cyril and I talked about it, I think last week on the show too, about how we saw the spike in homelessness in Bucks County. And we're going to see that kind of dynamic everywhere now. And unless there's going to be people pointing that out, that's incredible. I mean, I was like, it's funny, not funny. I mean, funny in the kind of like, I remember like looking around and actually noticing people who appeared to be homeless, right, in Bucks County on my drives in ways that I had not recognized before.
Yeah.
And that, and again, it was like the kind of thing that just kind of stuck out in the kind of the back of my mind as I'm driving to work or something. And then to read your piece, I'm like, duh.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's not just this kind of, I happen to notice this person. It's because there's more people who are already experiencing this. And so thank
Yeah.
God you're focusing on this.
And the vast majority of people experiencing homelessness don't want to be found. They don't want to be counted. They don't want to be seen. A lot of them have children. They're afraid they'll lose their children to children and youth. There is no reason to be visible unless you've lost everything else possible already. And so you've got the most desperate people there experiencing chronic long-term homelessness. And if you look at the HUD numbers, the numbers have gone down in the last 15 years. But also in the last 15 years, HUD changed the definition. Yeah. Definition of homelessness used to be 4 experiences of homelessness, chronic homelessness, 4 experiences of homelessness in 3 years. Now it's 364 consecutive nights, and you have to prove it.
And you have to prove it.
And you have to prove it.
Oh, let me just pull out my filing cabinet that I carry with me everywhere with like my daily documentation of this stuff. Oh, here's my TikTok account of me being homeless like for the past. I mean, that's insane.
Right. I didn't sleep in that emergency room that night because if you go to the hospital, you're not homeless anymore.
Get out.
So no. Scout's honor.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Pat, I mean, I think it's an understatement to say that we got our work cut out for us, and I mean us in the broad sense, kind of moving forward from here. So I know we're kind of run up on time here. So let me just kind of ask you this as kind of a way to kind of leave it with just think about, you're looking forward. You already kind of mentioned this one article you're working on, kind of around, say, gun violence and stuff. But when you're looking out kind of the stories that you really think are going to be important that you want to dig into, kind of looking down the road, or things that you already have got in the works, what can we expect?
Well, I think a lot of good stuff's coming out of Governor Shapiro's office. The administration, I think, possibly, and I'm not sure, but I don't speak for them. They don't allow that sort of thing. But I think that they've got a handle on the fact that there's got to be a dome over Pennsylvania someday, and we're really far from that point. But there's got to be a protective dome over and certainly we've seen this with choice, even though Pennsylvania is a hostile place a hostile place when you need to have reproductive health. But there needs to be protections in place in Pennsylvania, and we need to normalize the fact that people have needs. And I do see the administration as acknowledging that. So I've got stories. I mean, a little thing that the governor did yesterday that I think is fantastic. And as a woman who used to be a young woman, period products are now going to be paid for in every high school, in every school in Pennsylvania. Yeah. Awesome. I mean, it doesn't sound like much, but it's a huge thing. So those are things that make me feel like this administration really gets it. So we'll see.
Well, good. Well, Pat, like I appreciate your work personally so much. I know that so many people and readers of the Beacon have like shared out your work, and I encourage everybody. It's like, I mean, Pat's work makes sure that it gets the farthest reach possible. I know that we're in this kind of weird social media space of reshuffling right now. I would encourage. I mean, I will plug Blue Sky as a place to build community, and in a way that is not just a reproduction of the shit show on Twitter, but is actually something that has possibilities of sharing real information and building community, which was always the hope of that. So share that stuff out. Check out all Pat's work. And I look for some great pieces that are coming up like in the next kind of like few days, weeks, kind of ahead. And we're going to need you. And I'm so glad that you're with the Beacon.
Thanks. And I'm on Blue Sky also. And if you have a story lead, shoot me a message.
There you go. You got that? Where should they reach you at?
Well, you can send a message on Blue Sky. I don't have that locked down, but also my email address is pat@buckscountybeacon.com. And
All
until
right.
they hire another Pat, that should work fine.
That sounds great. All right, well, make sure we get that in the show notes. So if you didn't get that live here, shoot Pat, Pat at thebuckscountybeacon.com. If you got any leads, that'd be fantastic. Check her out on Blue Sky and make sure you read all of her stuff at the Bucks County Beacon and beyond, and share it out, everybody. Pat, thank you so much for taking the time to kind of be with me today.
Thanks, Kevin. Great to see you.
All right, everybody. This is Kevin Mahoney, and this is Hey Cyril, we missed you. But I think we did all right, Cyril. So we could do okay without you, buddy. But no. But look, I wish everybody a fantastic weekend. Again, make sure you're spending time with community, with family, with friends. You're going to need to kind of rejuice those batteries, making sure that we're all set for the long haul that is ahead of us. All right, everybody, have a great weekend. This is Kevin Mahoney for the Bucks County Beacon's Friday News Lunch. We are out of here. All right. Gotta love it, everyone. See ya.